I wanted to cover another Russia-Ukraine story. And it has to do with this report from Forbidden Stories that followed the path of Ukrainian journalist Victoria Roshchyna. Now, she was going into occupied Zaporizhia in order to document the torture of Ukrainians. That was her goal. Her goal was to go to locations where Ukrainians are being tortured, interview people, find out their pathways, find out what's going on, and cover it and document it in order, for the historical record so people know what's going on. That was her goal, and she was making trips into occupied territory to do it, which is incredibly dangerous field reporting. Incredibly dangerous. Honestly, I wouldn't do it. That's my limit. Okay, you want to, if anybody's with Dylan, what's your limit for, what you would do? I'd go to just about any frontline position, but anything that gives me a high likelihood of getting captured by the Russians, okay? Blowing up from a drone could take, a minute to 3 minutes to bleed out. That's terrible. It could take nothing but a second. Torture in a facility for months and months and months is something I want no part of. It's something I want no part of. And what this investigation from Forbidden Story revealed is that is exactly what happened to Victoria after she became a subject of the very thing that she was trying to document. And in 2024, she was abducted by the Russians. And then she was sent, according to the testimony that was collected by these Forbidden Stories investigators, to different facilities all the way until she was brought over into Russia. And according to the testimony of those who were with her, she was extremely fierce. She would call those torturing and keeping them imprisoned murderers, but she was also fiercely tortured. And eventually, after it was announced that the Russian government was going to transfer her after a decline in her health back to her family, she was not sent with the expected crew or group of people that she was supposed to be sent back with, the group that was transferred. And her parents were told that she was going to be sent home, but that didn't happen. What they got instead was a letter that she had been killed. Well, died. They didn't say killed, they said died. How did she die? Well, they just said she died. She just died. And then from then, there was nothing. There was no updates. There was no anything. It was radio silent about how she died, what happened, and where her body is. Is her body going to be turned over? To the point that her family doesn't even necessarily believe that she's dead because they have yet to be provided evidence until recently. See, body bags on February 25th were given to Ukrainian authorities, and these body bags were then given to forensic investigators in Vinnytsia. Now, one of these bags that were marked NM SPAS 757, scrawled in handwriting on the bag, was labeled as an unnamed male in Russian. Now, after the bag was opened and examined by forensic investigators, they were able to find extensive damage to the arteries and as well as other signs of what could be correlative with torture, including certain fractures and bruising and damage around the neck that could be equaling to strangulation. Now, there's also other reporting in the story about other types of torture, but this is the kicker. Like, for example, cuts from knife marks and other bruising of the ribs. But what they found is that it wasn't an unnamed male. It wasn't another male soldier. It was mislabeled. It was actually a young woman. And then after doing a DNA test and finding a small tag attached to the right arm that had her name, they were able to identify it with the DNA test saying 99.999% chance of it being Victoria. The thing that is the biggest kicker in the story, though, I think when it comes to at least the retrieval of the body, is what wasn't there, not what was there, the signs of torture and the bruising of the ribs. That type of stuff, I'm not to say it doesn't deserve all the rage in the world, but this has been something that's been talked about before, the type of torture people face in Russian imprisonment. I mean, the Forbidden Stories talks about the 20,000 civilians that are expected to have been detained by the Russian detainment system. The big kicker here on the body was that pieces of her brain and her eyes were missing. Pieces of her brain and eyes missing, gone. Why? Where did it go? Well, the suspicion as to why parts of her eyeballs and her brain was missing is that it was to help cover up signs of torture. And that by cutting out the part of the brain and cutting out the eyeballs, you might be able to cover up some of those more negative signs. Now, mind you, they still found the bruised ribs. They still found the strangulation around the neck and the broken bones. At least I believe in this area. Go read the report for yourself. They've got testimony about knife marks that her cellmates used to see in her body, cuts that were made on her. But they still tried some attempt. Cut out the eyes, cut out the brain. This is the first journalist in Ukraine to have been confirmed to have been captured by the Russians, thrown through the detention system, and killed. Now, this is not the first journalist to die in this war. There have been journalists that have died outside of Chasiv Yar. A French journalist died outside of Chasiv Yar. There have been Ukrainian journalists who died during the Battle of Kiev. Ukraine actually has a pretty high fatality rate for journalists in the war, from shrapnel attacks, bombings, etc., shooting. You get the idea. This is the first time that a journalist has been captured while doing reporting, and then ended up dead after going through the system, with these types of signs from forensic investigators presented by, of course, it's the Ukrainian prosecutors who are now pursuing this. When I say that there is no civil society in occupied Ukraine for the press, freedom of expression, investigative journalism, this is what I mean. Violence does not necessarily end at the end of a formal declaration of war or when the peace documents are signed. If these types of facilities are allowed to continue to operate, these torture factories that transfer these people from facility to facility, then how can we call that peace? I don't think we can.